The simplest way to obtain functional assessment observation is to use something called an ABC chart. It's simple in theory. It takes some practice to do it well. It's done by having 3 columns on a sheet, and you can just draw this on a sheet of paper really easily, or you can do some kind of printed form. You've got a column called antecedents, a column called behaviors, a column called consequences. It's important that you fill in some background information. What time did you start observing? What time did you stop? Where were you when you did the observation? In general, what was going on? Then I like to start this out with some specific behaviors in mind. You don't want to record everything someone does, but decide what priority behaviors there are and what do you want to really take some data on. The first thing you record on this sheet is the middle column, the behavior. That's because you really don't have an antecedent until a behavior occurs, and you really can't have a consequence until you have a behavior. So once you have a behavior, then you ask the question, okay, what was going on just before the behavior occurred? You write that down. And then what happened? What happened as a result of the behavior? You write that down. Don't try to write down a lot here. You want to be pretty quick because otherwise you're going to miss too much information as you're recording something. I like to also use numbers just to keep things straight. So here's an example. The first thing you would record is Michael pushed Tim from behind. What was going on when that happened? Well, the kids were running around in a circle. What was the consequence? Tim yelled at Michael, "Stop!" And you put number 1. Next thing that happened is Michael told Tim, "You're a nerd," and he hit him on the head. That happened when the kids were standing in the circle talking, and the consequence is Tim didn't do anything, and Michael laughed. Then Michael hit Tim on the back as they were running. That happened when the bell rang and the kids were running towards the building. Tim yelled, "Stop it, stupid." That was the consequence. So you keep it short. You're not going to learn a lot by just looking at 3 occurrences of a behavior. You're not going to see any patterns until you have at least 15 or 20 occurrences, actually. That's sort of the minimum number that you need to start looking at patterns of, is this escape or is this attention, or patterns in antecedents. Another form of data collection that's really useful is something called a scatter plot. A scatter plot is really just a grid that enables you to list the time of the day, or sometimes I'll just put the student's schedule here, and then I'll put dates on this axis. So I'll fill in like today's date, tomorrow, the next day, so forth. All you have to do with a scatter plot is if the behavior, you can do a code. If the behavior occurs one time within this period of time, you make a diagonal mark. If the behavior happens more than one time, you color the mark in completely. So that's what these little codes mean up here. You can say, this is no occurrence, this is 1 occurrence, or 1 to 2, and this is more than 2, or whatever. What this does is it allows you to see patterns over time, or big global patterns, not specific. So this is an example of what it might look like for a student. And looking at this, well, it looks like this kid has more problems during spelling and language arts than at other times of the day. I don't know, what it's specifically about those things. I can maybe guess that maybe things that involve writing. There's some problems during math group too, but maybe there's some writing. So I'm just going to have some ideas at this time, and then I'm going to want to go in and actually observe the student during these times to learn more. So a scatter plot's not going to give me the kind of data I need to develop an intervention or to confirm a hypothesis or summary statement. It is going to help me know when it might be important to observe a kid, though. So don't try to use it as your sole means of data collection. It's a good first step, though. I would want to see this kid in spelling and language arts, and I'd also maybe want to stop by during science. What about science is different so that this kid doesn't have problems? Well, it could be that the kid simply sits in the back of the classroom and the teacher doesn't make him do anything. That would explain that. So it's important to see what's happening at these times or get more information. This is just another example of a scatter plot. A form that is really useful sometimes, although it takes some practice, is called the Functional Assessment Observation Form. We'll work on this together. It's actually easier if you see someone do it. What this form does is it gives the same information that an ABC form would do, but it does it in such a way that it doesn't involve a lot of writing. So it can be extremely useful sometimes. The downside is you've got to have a really good idea of what you're looking for before you go in and do an observation. It's not as flexible as an ABC form. It requires you to know what behaviors, know what antecedents you're looking at, and you can set up the data form. So I've used this a lot over the years, but I've also just used the ABC form as well. They're both really useful. This form requires a little more practice. So we'll work on this together in class. You get your data and then you confirm your summary statements, you make revisions if you need to, then you proceed to developing a plan. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about how do you go from assessment to developing an intervention plan. It's important to get good data, good functional assessment information, but it's more important what you actually do with it. So the key is, how are you going to use this information to develop an intervention that's more likely to have a positive effect on the life of your student?